Mhm. All right. So all through the course, we've been talking about different ways people identify with who they are, how we look at other individuals, and probably one of the significant relationships we'll have in life. It's really the basis of our species and the continuation of our species, if we want to put it in scientific bland terms, is attraction and mate selection with individuals who we find appealing, I guess you would say, and who we would like to spend time with and be with and choose to even possibly start a family with. So this is our next topic for this section, and so we'll first talk about attraction, and then we'll look at the mate selection process. But you'll notice these kind of do blend together as we get into the conversation dealing with attraction. Okay. Now, in many ways, we don't always know why people are attracted to who they are. We've always looked at things like similarities, such as similar religious beliefs, similar social economic status, similar upbringings. But even recent research has challenged a lot of that you only need a minimal amount of similarity to start the attraction process. And that's important to note as we move forward and look at these kind of issues. So let me, first of all, attraction impels one person to seek out another, and attraction changes lives, as Fisk put in 2013 in this very strange quote that doesn't look complete, but the idea is that we do try to find those few people who just stand out in a crowd, and we choose to kind of be in or get close to those individuals. So again, a more formal definition of attraction is concerns a desire for voluntary relationships sustained because participants enjoy each other. And I think there's important aspects of this definition that we need to be clear on, and that is the desire for voluntary relationships. Okay. Because we know that even in our modern world, quote unquote, there are still things such as arranged marriages. There's still things as limited availability of individuals to who we can have a relationship with. And so when we talk about when we're talking specifically about attraction, please keep in mind that we're looking at that voluntary relationship. However, there are other relationship structures where attraction didn't in the beginning play a role. And again, the easiest example is, for example, arranged marriages. Okay. Sustained because participants enjoy each other. Okay. Again, we have to go back to this because in some relationships, people participate in it without necessarily enjoying the other person. They feel obligated, for example. There are certain psychological disorders that we'll go over. Well, if you take abnormal psych or a psych class, called dependency disorder, which is the need to be dependent on someone else at an extreme and obsessive level. And that's not necessarily going into that relationship with joy intact. We can also look at things like relationship violence and dating violence, which the relationship or the sustained attention for each other is done through fear, by power, and control. Okay. So when we're talking about attraction, kind of keep these things in mind, because sometimes, or actually quite a few times, people can be with each other, but not necessarily be attracted to each other. And just like with everything, when we're dealing with human behavior, especially, we need to look at three kind of areas. One, the behavior, one's tendency to approach or avoid the other person. Cognitions, one's belief about other individuals. And we just got done talking about a lot about things like stereotypes and those kinds of things. And one aspect of that is we also have positive stereotype models. And this is kind of what this is talking about is those positive stereotypes are the ones that we're attracted to. Positive ones, again, are the ones that we tend to be most familiar with and the ones that are more predictable. And the reason why I have to say predictable is sometimes individuals are attracted to individuals that you would not think are healthy. Okay. And so, but if you were raised in a chaotic, sometimes abusive environment, that's what becomes predictable to you. So when we say one's belief about a person and attraction, we got to look at familiarity, but also predictability. Because to some people, what looks like a strange relationship or a strange attraction, and you go, why would that person be with that kind of person? You have to look at that past and see what's predictable for that individual. Okay. And then there's the primary affect, and that's a simple evaluation of liking or not liking another person. The difference between primary affect and cognition is a lot of times there can be a difference between our cognition and our affect or emotions towards someone. Okay. And so our emotions can drive us just as much as our pure thoughts of liking or disliking. And sometimes those are in conflict with each other. And there's always three things to consider when it comes to, especially the study of attraction, okay? Because there is a lot of diversity in the attraction realm. We do have kind of these three kind of trends, I should call them, instead of laws or rules. But there's a lot of variation in who we're attracted to. So not everyone follows kind of the trends, okay? The first one is, of course, our biology, our genetics, and our evolutionary implications. So we will see later on that people tend to be attracted to individuals who have signals of good physical health. And of course, the evolutionary implications is the whole idea behind evolution is to pass our genetic material on to another person. And so we tend to choose individuals who we think would be most successful at doing that. Okay. But beyond that simple analysis, though, there's another great variation, and that's into social shared norms. Okay, so this is now what's going to complicate this simple analysis based on biology and evolution, is that social shared norms don't necessarily lend to evolutionary implications, okay? There is a lot of norms that might even inhibit the passing on of genetic materials. And I know this sounds strange, but one of those is marriage. And because what marriage requires individuals to do is not pass on your genetic material to as many individuals as possible to continue your biological chain, but marriage as a social norm requires you to only do it with one single individual, which decreases the evolutionary and biological and genetic pressures that are put on individuals, okay? From that simple example, we then can go to idiosyncratic preferences, okay? Idiosyncratic means within the individual. So it can have implications of social norms, but idiosyncratic is more of a preference to the individual. And I'll kind of give an example of social shared norms and idiosyncratic preferences is on the social shared norms in the United States culture. You should be attracted to someone who has low body weight, is physically fit. There's a hip to waist ratio that is a social norm. But on the idiosyncratic level, there's individuals who have preferences for larger individuals and for people who don't fit that social norm of what you should be, quote unquote, in our culture attracted to. Okay, so that's an example of idiosyncratic preferences. And then there's all kinds of idiosyncratic preferences. So for example, social shared norms state that a woman should find a male who is successful, who is educated. Yet there are individuals who are repulsed by educated individuals, or who are repulsed by individuals who have a lot of money. And so those are all examples of idiosyncratic preferences and how they don't necessarily fit into the social norm as well. So the point of this slide is that we have to look at the great variation based on these three interplaying dynamics. Okay. Now, there are some principles that we could look at. And again, these are just principles, meaning they kind of drive the attraction process, but don't necessarily explain it all based on that slide we just saw. The first principle of attraction is familiarity. And just as Mark Twain says, familiarity both breeds contempt and children. Okay. Now, while there are some people who are attracted to strangers, okay, the majority of people are attracted to those who they are familiar with, okay? Even if it's someone new that you're meeting, usually that person new has some type of appeal to individuals that you're most familiar with. With that being said, there is a subset of the population, we think it's under about 10%, somewhere around there, that are completely and totally attracted to strangers. And once they start becoming familiar, they start becoming unattractive to the individual, okay? But kind of the process of familiarity kind of goes like this, is whenever we have a novel person come into our life, we have a warning sign that goes off. Our amygdala, the fear center of the brain, starts to fire. And it's saying, is this person safe? Okay. Well, what we know about time with individual, it's called the mere exposure effect. Okay. And I think I've explained this in this class before. If we were all here in person and we had some other student who everyone at the beginning of the semester completely did not like, okay, the law of mere exposure states that if I measured that dislike at the beginning of the semester and then measured again at the end of the semester, that dislike would be less by the end of the semester. Okay, that meaning if they scored a 10 on dislike, they would score somewhere around a 5 or 6 by the end of the semester, just through the exposure to those individuals, okay? Well, we're not starting off with people that we completely dislike, but what the rule of mere exposure says is over time, we gain familiarity over individuals, and that results in attraction, okay? And again, even if it's a novel person, if they feel or seem familiar, that's enough to start the attraction process. The other principle of attraction is similarity. As similar qualities increase, levels of intensity of the relationship increase, okay? So those couples who look the same tend to have a higher level of attraction for each other, okay? The whole notion, birds who flock together stay together, and the other one, opposites attract. Okay, what we have found is do opposites attract? Yes, for a very small portion of the population, but for the most part, similarity and having the same person, that bird you would flock with, again, is more of the rule than opposites attract. And then the third one is reciprocity. Okay, we want to know we are liked and thought well of. Therefore, positive attention leads to greater attention or attraction. Okay. But there is some caveats to this one. Okay. Is that one, it has to be authentic. Authentic. Okay. So if you've ever been with somebody that is always calling you beautiful, wonderful, sweet, blah, 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 but you know you're not in the morning, and you know you're not, if you're one of those people like me, you wake up kind of on the grumpy end of the bed, but they're still calling you sweet and nice and beautiful, you kind of start to question them and their intent. It's kind of like, no, I don't think so. And then we get into the idea of too much can lead to what's called motive seeking. What do they really want? Are they really into me? Recently, I've heard the term, what is it? Love bombing. I think it is a popular term where a person is just constantly, do you love me? I love you. Love, da, 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 da. This follows that same principle, that the individual is trying to seek out some other thing from you other than seeing you as someone that they're truly attracted to. Okay. We should talk about the role of physical appearance, because this goes back to the biological aspect of it. We should look at first the automatic processes that occur, such as physical appearance, which, like I stated earlier, has a lot to do. Is this person physically healthy? And then we have to look at the role of stereotypes, those who are in my in-group versus those who are in my out-group. And then we should look at cognitive affective processes, such as learned history, goals and desires, morals, beliefs, and values. Okay. And this is when we make the decision to engage. And often this process is made on that first impression we have with someone. So if we think they look familiar to us, again, this learned history is that familiarity, predictability. If they look like they have the same goals and desires, so let's say you're a go-get-em, want to be the future CEO, in I-class world, you'd probably be looking at a person who's wearing a suit and those kinds of things, and evaluate that person as meeting that goals and those desires. And then morals, beliefs, and values. So, I know that, if you're Catholic and you see another person wearing a cross, that's something that would signal to you that they have that same moral and beliefs and values as you do. Okay? There is what's called a physical appearance fallacy, is that for some reason we like positive qualities to physical qualities that then leads to positive qualities. So we think that in order to be smart, intelligent, outgoing, you must look strong, physically healthy, those kinds of things. But then this is the turnaround on this. That arrow should actually go back up to positive qualities, because we assume those physical qualities means that that person is smart, outgoing, and those kinds of things. And it's really kind of a fallacy we have based on physical appearance. But what it does allow the physically attractive person to do is to have these advantages based on that fallacy. Okay. is they do tend to be more confident, more sexually experienced. They tend to be less socially anxious since everyone wants to be around them. And because there's those assumed positive qualities, they tend to be more successful because they tend to get the better jobs because of that assumption, and they're treated more fairly. I don't know if I mentioned it in this class, but studies of young children have shown that you can have a teacher or a care provider say that they have no biases towards their children. They don't treat any of their children any different. But then when we go record it, we find that the more physically attracted children tend to get more positive feedback. They get more one-on-one time. When they do something wrong, they're more likely to have a positive corrective method. And the less attractive children tend to have more harsh punishment. They tend to get less attention from the teacher, and they tend to be ignored more often than the more attractive children in the classroom. And this is when a teacher measures really high on equality. We can give them a diversity scale. They measure really good on that. They measure all of these things, but we can still measure this bias as early as preschool classrooms, okay? And so we do have these biases, unfortunately. So when we look at cross-cultural research, and again, I'm going to state this, there's a lot of diversity in who people are attracted to. These are what we call general trends or universals of attractiveness that we find across cultures, okay? And again, you'll see that these have a lot to do with the probability of reproduction. Okay, so universal attractions include signs of use, such as having clear skin, sign of health, absence of sores, large wide set eyes, smaller nose, smaller in chin, and predominant cheekbones tend to be some universalities that we look at not only in women, but we look at in men as well, okay? The other one is what's called facial symmetry. Okay, so we have a picture of a gentleman here. The picture on the right. No, the picture on the right is this poor individual's actual face. The picture on the left is a computer that made his face symmetrical. Okay, so you'll notice the difference between the two with the eyebrow lifted and down. That's his actual face, okay? And what they do in these experiments is they simply have women and sometimes men come in and rate the attractiveness. And they're either given the picture on the left or they're given the picture on the right. And they're just asked some questions about attractiveness. Would you go on a date with this? Those kinds of things. And what we find is that even though this is the same exact individual, women will rate the picture on the left significantly higher, more attractive than the picture on the right, okay? And there's some theories of why facial symmetry is important. The first one is aesthetic argument, and that's it. If you really look at art, the most famous artwork is symmetrical. So when you look at the Mona Lisa as an example, everything is symmetrical. There's a balance between the right side of the picture and the left side of the picture. When we look at even mountain scenes and flowers and we see the petals that are symmetrical with each other, we tend to find those things as more beautiful than things that are asymmetrical. So there's that argument. There's the familiarity argument that if your face is balanced, it feels more familiar to us. But maybe probably from a biological perspective, is it cold in here or is it me, Brittany? Probably the one that makes a little bit more sense from a biological perspective is that we know that the more asymmetrical a face is, the more developmental issues the individual may have, the lower fertility level that they may have. They have a slower growth rate and a poor survival rate, okay? And we think that that's probably, from at least a biological perspective, why with humans, we look for people who have more symmetrical than asymmetrical faces, okay? For women, this is for men. So men attracted to women, on average, on general, look for youthfulness, good health, and fertility. And this is kind of an interesting one, is the waist to hip ratio how do I put this? For the healthiest natural birth, for a woman to not be at risk of death during birth, or the child being stillborn, okay, coming out of the mother's uterus, is that the closer the waist to hip ratio is to 0.7, the easier birth the woman will have, okay? And what we have found is that regardless of any other feature of a female, the closer a female is to this ratio, the more attractive men report her to be. The less she is from this ratio, the less attractive men report that individual to be. And again, these are computer things where we can adjust the weight. And so it's the same individual, but just by adjusting that waist to hip ratio, it denotes the attractiveness. Now, I do want to say this is initial attraction. So these pictures are shown to an individual for just a couple of seconds, okay? So it's that immediate reaction to an individual, okay? And I just want to bring that out there, because this isn't the only variable that that is looked at after more exposure to the individual, okay? When it comes to women attraction to men, we find the face is very important, okay? So we have, for example, cues of dominant, deep voice rather than high pitch, stereotype faces, and I'll give you some examples of these stereotype faces. But I want to go to, first of all, cues of dominance. So again, even when we take women who state that they want the sweet, sensitive, kind guy, again, when we expose pictures of men's faces, the sweet, kind guy versus the more dominant guy, women tend to rate the dominant face as more attractive, okay? The deep voice rather than high pitch. There used to be a funny show on BBC where they would bring women in. They based it on the research done on this. And they had men who had very deep voices and men who had really high pitched voices. And they had them both read a romantic poem of some type, okay? And they had a curtain so that the female could not see who was reading the poem. And so they would, have him, the deep voice guy, and they say, can you describe who you think is behind that curtain? And with the deep voice, they would say, oh, he must be muscular and athletic and strong, very masculine, blah, blah, blah. And then the high-pitched voice, they usually say, oh, he probably is overweight. He's probably puny, or either overweight or puny, probably a nerd. Those kind of more derogatory nerd terms and those kinds of things. But then they would lift the curtain, and usually the deep voice guy was usually heftier And the high-pitched voice was someone who had those long muscular bodies. Why? The larger the guy is with more girth, the more testosterone he produces. So that makes the voice deeper. A really athletic individual has lower testosterone levels. And so their voices tend to be higher pitched. Okay. And so it usually always surprised the women. Oh my gosh, I didn't do that. So I guess the point being is if you have a male friend who is trying to be attracted or try to get the attention of a girl and he might not be that great looking, have him do a phone call first and tell him to do it in a deep voice. And he might increase his chance. Okay. So that's a deep voice rather than the high-pitched voice. And then the stereotype, I can show these. So these tend to be, you know, the jutted jaw, the angular face, and the craggy kind of eye, this deep kind of over skin right here. These tend to, again, not all, but universally kind of give instant attraction, okay? So that's face, so that's the facial cues. The next ones are fads are important. And what I mean by that is not you know, fads from New York City or Paris. What I mean is local fads, okay, is what is in style for your local community and your local place, okay? And so for an example of this would be is, you know, well, where I come from a very rural community, not high income, not big city type. And so men who came to that town with a three-piece suit and tie on were not found very attractive. But the guys with the Wrangler jeans and maybe a button-up shirt were it. Okay. Now, and it was all due to that because at that time when I lived there, Wrangler jeans, cowboy boots, and a button-up shirt was the fad for that area. And so guys that came in wearing three-piece suit, they were just kind of not interested. Okay. Now, why do we think fads are important? It's because we think it shows that one, that the guy is in tune to the local community and the local culture, and they understand what's going on. Two, it shows that they invest in themselves, that they care about being part of society and culture, and so they're not wearing you know, clothes that don't fit or overdoing it, but they understand the socialness of it. So that's kind of why we think fads matter for women, but I think that one probably could be up for debate as well. Okay. Beyond visual clues influence other sensations used for women. For example, smell tends to be very important for women attracted to men, okay? Probably one of the better simple research examples is if we put a woman in the booth, we're gonna show her the same exact pictures, but she gets randomly assigned to either a booth that where there's t-shirts that have never been worn, or she's gonna be put in a booth where the t-shirts were worn by, for example, the football team while they were practicing. Okay, so they have that male sweat on them. Okay, and then we're going to show pictures of the same exact individuals, and we're going to have the women rate the attractiveness of the individuals. And what we find is that the women who were in the football wearing t-shirt booth will measure the men's attractiveness significantly higher than the women who are in the freshly laundered, non-worn shirt booth. Okay. And again, the best explanation for this goes back to biology, because when men sweat, they also sweat testosterone. And we think that that is producing that pheromone that increases that biological attractiveness to other men. So, and that's kind of why, to me, I think a lot of male colognes and stuff kind of smell like, I don't know, smell boothish. But that's just me. That just might be my idiosyncratic bias. So those are some of the universals that we see with women. Again, there's a lot of variation in this, but this is just the trend. And then again, this is just the facial feature. Okay. I'm going to do this slide first. So what about men and women? What do men and women tend to value highest cross-culturally? Well, based on survey, we see that things like kindness, loyalty, emotional stability tend to be the top three. When it comes to men, when we do surveys, youthfulness and physical appearance tends for women. Status, resource acquisition, such as education, earning potential, ambition, tend to be higher rated. I'm trying to think of what the analysis of personal ads is. Oh, okay. And we actually have seen what I was meaning by the analysis of personal ads is it's kind of interesting when we look at the history of ads, especially on the internet and stuff like that. It used to be in the beginning, you know, I want a kind, loyal guy, attractive, those kinds of things were tended to be the top three. But over the last 10 years, we have found that has changed, where most women actually, unfortunately, start their personal ad with, please have a job in your own transportation. And so we've seen these kind of need to have someone who can be either an equal or some type of resource become important for those very reasons. Okay. One of the issues is when we're seeing women and men's power becoming more and more equal, what many individuals thought, and I can kind of maybe put it up here. So this axis represents power. This axis represents comparison, okay? And this line represents the increased power of women, okay? So, whoops. So low power to high power, okay? And this line, though, is going to represent attraction or a need for attraction towards a male, okay? Now, this is what, let me first explain what we expected, okay? So this is what the researchers expected to happen, that as female power increased, the need for a man who has power will either decrease or remain the same as the female. Okay, so it would be somewhere within this range is what the researchers and theorists thought. Okay, now I'm going to change colors and give you what actually they found. In the research they found, and it's with the yellow line, that as female power increased, so power being wealth, ability to make decisions, controlling one's own life, so is what we found is that as female power increases, the need for a man with power exponentially increases. Okay. And so the findings suggest is that even though men and women are becoming more equal in power, the more powerful a woman needs, the more powerful of a man she wants. Okay. And this is why we often find, if we look at in economic structures, people more in the low economic working class, the male and female tend to have similar power levels. But then when we get to the upper higher class, there tends to be a power differential between the female and the male. Okay. So that's kind of an analysis and a trend that we're seeing as we move forward. And when we look at it from a sociological perspective, it kind of fits this micro research that we found. Okay. Okay, so just to summarize mate selection, mere exposure, we tend to marry someone from our own neighborhood, school, or workplace. That's changing with globalization. We tend to marry people with similar height, religion, intelligence, personality, and physical attraction. And the other thing that we're finding is that we want something called fair and equitable distribution of resources, okay? Now, this doesn't mean just money. This means emotional resources, okay? This means we seek people who we feel give us the same emotional responses we give them, same attention, those types of things. And as relationships move on, we find that individuals where that equity starts to change, the less and less attracted they become to those individuals. Okay. The other thing that we know when it comes to mate selection, so this is going from attraction to mate selection. And so those three things I just went over is about selection. So we can be attracted to a lot of people, but now we're going to focus that attention to just a few individuals, okay? So, but when it comes to mate selection, we find men tend to be more interested in several short-term intense relationships, where in general, women tend to have a preference for fewer relationships over the lifespan, okay? And this kind of comes up to what's called the Hawaii experiments, which was done years ago, where they had what we would call average looking Confederates being individuals who are working for the experimenter, that were rated average attractiveness, okay? And on the campus of a university, these individuals went up to, they had one of two questions. They said either, would you have sex with me? Or they would ask other people, would you go on a date with me? Okay. And what they found is when you went up randomly and said, would you have sex with me? 70% of men would say yes, and 0% of women would say yes. Okay. Now that may have changed over time. I don't know. But that's what they found in this experiment. I would assume that the trend is still consistent. But the interesting thing is those men who did say no, so that 30% didn't say, so the women who said no said it very upset, like, how would you even ask me to do something like that? They were outraged and disgusted, okay? The men, however, would come up with an excuse. They would say, oh, I'm married, or I'm already involved with someone. Sorry, if I could, I would. Those kinds of things. Very, very few of the men who said no were also outraged and disgusted like the women, okay? Now, what happens when, would you go on a date with me? Well, we see male interest go down from 70% to 53%. But however, women's interest went up to 50%. So when it comes to dating, women and men are about the same level when there's not sex involved, okay? So we find out, would you go on date with me, and potentially, what is that called these days? Netflix with me or something like that. We find that women would be less than that 50%, men would be more than that 53%, and the like. So the point of these Hawaii experiments goes back to this, that men tend to be more interested in the potential for a sexual relationship, where women in general tend to be more interested in connecting and making more of a long-term type of relationship. We do know that when men do engage in long-term relationships, they do kind of a cost analysis, cost and benefits analysis, excuse me, in that we know that men will tend to engage in long-term relationships when the quality of that relationship outweighs the benefits of having multiple encounters. Okay. We know that wealthier men are more likely to engage in what's called serial relationships, more commonly known as cheating. And this goes to the stereotype of the upper class man with his secretary at work and his wife at home kind of thing. But we know, it turned off. We do know that as wealth increases, the more likely a male to cheat will increase. And we also know that men are more likely to engage in long-term relationships if the perceived premarital chastity on the part of the female. So as the number of reported sexual partners a woman tells a man increases, the less likely the man is to engage in a long-term relationship. And this brings up, I think, kind of the social aspects and the social norms of, no, that's not what we want. Yeah, kinda. A lot of these, if you think about, especially the third yellow box, brings in a lot of the social norms and things of expectation in cultures that come to light. Okay. Now, we also know that there are women who will also seek out short-term several relationships, but I have to be honest with you, this slide needs to be updated because the current research suggests that there is actually no negative effects. This was original research that was done, so you can kind of cross this stuff out. We're finding more and more in research that we're not finding any really negative effects. The only thing we're finding is that women who tend to be in more short terms tend to experience more rejection by especially parents and others. But as far as a psychological issue, there seems to be none. Okay. Cross-cultural research has shown across cultures and across time, women will also engage in extra pair population. So this is another one of those fancy words for cheating. It's interesting when we look at the difference of who women will choose to cheat with and who men will choose to cheat with. Women tend to cheat when they're motivated by dissatisfied in their current relationships, and or they start receiving gifts and some type of either status received from an extra person. Okay. So again, for females, it's either because of dissatisfaction in relationship or they're receiving more attention from someone else than their current partner. Okay. Now, probably the large difference between men and women in general is women tend to cheat with men who are two social statuses above their current partner. When men tend to cheat with women who are two social statuses below their current partner. So women cheat up, men cheat down. But again, and I want to bring this perspective up, this is perceived social status on the cheater's behalf. Okay, so if you're one of those extramarital persons, it's not necessarily that you're less than. I just want to put that out there. We have wondered too, and this is some of the interesting areas of research being done in the area of relationships is we're still looking at the effects of globalization and the internet and the ability to have instant communication. We do know that there's been an effect on the ability to have access to who your partner is chatting with and talking with. And we know that it has expanded the potential resources or potential mating for people. Okay, and so we've seen things like increases in extramarital affairs. We've seen increases in the willingness to go outside one's relationship, because what we have seen with globalization and the internet is instead of before the internet, you usually were limited to selecting a partner within a 6-block radius of where you live. I'm thinking out here in rural Arizona, it's probably more like a 6-mile radius of where you live. But when we're looking at like a town or a city, it's about 6 blocks was your kind of pool of individuals who you could choose from. But with globalization and internet, you can literally be talking with and having some type of either emotional or distant sexting relationship with pretty much anybody across the globe. And we have found that this has increased the amount of, things like cheating, shortening of relationships, and all of those kinds of things. But we don't still know what the long-term effects of it are. The increased power of women, resource relationships, and to partnership relationships. We looked at the demise of guys earlier this semester, and we found that women are being much more successful, and this is making men a lot less successful. When we thought originally, when we wanted to find the sexes equal, as if we push both up to an equal power status, then we would find some balance between us. But what we're finding is when one increases power, the other one starts to lose, I guess you'd say. I'm trying to think of a better term, but that's kind of what we're thinking with modern globalization. And again, what do we know about same-sex relationships? I think I mentioned it in this class again, but if you want to do research on LGBTQ populations, I would recommend looking at research from about 2012 and above, because it wasn't until 2012 where the federal government would pay for independent, unbiased research. They wouldn't. In fact, before 2012, you could not get a federal research grant to study LGBTQ relationships. You had to rely on funding from special interest groups. And what we know about research done when it's purchased by a special interest groups is they either find findings for or against LGBTQ relationships. But since 2012, we've been able to do research independent of the resources kind of motive or expectation. And what we have found is that pretty much LGBTQ relationships go towards the same exact patterns as heterosexual relationships. Dependent upon whether the individual is attracted to someone of the same sex, who have more feminine or masculine qualities will determine which type of attraction that they'll be most interested in. So we find that, for example, lesbian women who are attracted to more masculine individuals will tend to follow those kind of rules that we saw with male attractiveness and mate selection. And men who tend to prefer more feminine men will follow more of those female attractiveness guidelines that we saw earlier. And as we will see when we get into more relationship, now that we've chosen someone, we're going to look at the falling in love process in the next class. We will find that homosexual, or I shouldn't use that word, LGBTQ relationships have the same issues that heterosexual relationships have. They have domestic violence, they have divorce rates, they have same propensity for the potential of long-term loving relationships as much as heterosexual relationships. So we find that there's really so far nothing that sets either relationship pattern separate from the other than the gender that the person is attracted to. Okay. So where we're heading, we'll get through this. What we're going to head into next is what we call romantic love. So you're attracted to someone, and then you've chosen that one single individual. And then on Wednesday, we're going to go through what's called the romantic love process and what it is, why we get stuck with it. And there'll be much more to be said about that this coming Wednesday. Let me stop sharing.